Okay, welcome to episode number 35 of the Coffee with Joffrey podcast. Today I have a guest on. I have Ross Gilmour from the Better Body Collective. And this one is, I've been waiting to get Ross on for a little while now. This is all about leveling up your fat loss. So Ross is a real expert here. I met Ross about 6 or 7 years ago. I think we were competing in the DFC, the Dubai Fitness Competition together. And we've kind of kept tabs on each other since then. And Ross is someone in the fitness industry who I always kind of class as almost like a master trainer. He's got kind of loads of different strings to his bow. I know he went down the like Olympic lifting route at one point. He was obviously big into his CrossFit. The direction that he's kind of gone in now is a lot more kind of fat loss aesthetics. I'm sure he's going to correct me on this after. But for any of you that follow Ross, you'll know already, and for those of you that don't, you will be after this. Just the level of detail that Ross pays to almost everything in regards to health and fitness, whether it's nutrition, whether it's movement mechanics, he's got it down, and he does it at a level that's really, really knowledgeable. Even for someone like myself, who's been in the industry a long time, I'm always picking up points from him. So this was the perfect opportunity to get him. I'm going to introduce him now. Ross, how are you doing?
Good, thanks, Joff, and very kind words. I don't think I would have been able to do a better introduction myself, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to make you do a little bit more now. So, Ross, for those that don't know you, do you want to just kind of give yourself a little bit of an introduction as well? Touch on anything that I didn't already mention, maybe?
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of an idea of where I'm from. So you probably hear in the accent, I am a Scottish lad. I'm from Glasgow, or just a little town outside of Glasgow called Cumbernauld. To fast forward a good number of years, my original field of study was actually accounting and finance, which a lot of people don't know. So my actual degree from uni is a joint honours in accounting and finance. Hated being in an office, hated sitting and crunching numbers, even though my mind works in a very logical way. So but it was soul destroying, and I'm sure a lot of other trainers who have ended up getting into the industry from something else have had a very similar story. They're kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore. This just doesn't work. So I went from that and got into fitness. I just remember the day still. I was sitting in the office working in this recruitment consultant job that just I absolutely hated to the bones. And an advert came up over some of the ads saying, you've probably seen this, Job, become a personal trainer, earn 30K plus a year. And I was just kind of like, well, yeah. You know what? I'm not enjoying what I'm doing at the moment. So let's just take the gamble and take the jump. So I made the jump, and to fast forward it a bit more, a year and a half after being a PT in a gym in Glasgow, end of Glasgow, no less, which if anyone from Scotland will know, it's not the easiest area to charge a premium or make a living. It's where I met my current now wife, Mal, where we weren't actually together at the time. We were in Glasgow, she was working there as well. And we moved to Dubai around May 2012, I believe. And that's where our journey kind of in Dubai started. And I've spent the majority of both my 20s and my fitness career in Dubai. And like Joff said, then that kind of led down to different opportunities like being the head coach at the Warehouse Gym CrossFit program for a few years, getting involved in the DFC Championship a few times, been able to deliver education, like Olympic lifting education to trainers, speaking at a few events out here like the WeFit Pro Summit. And yeah, I've been exposed to a lot of opportunities, I would say, that I probably would never have got if I'd stayed in Scotland. In terms of, I suppose, personal journey with training, like Joff mentioned, I think rugby was my background initially. And I think the only reason I would have stopped playing rugby, to be honest, was moving out here. It wasn't practical any longer to put the time into rugby. So I needed something that kind of got those competitive juices flowing, and CrossFit was so popular over here at the time. That's what kind of got me into that. But I was always very passionate about, and this kind of goes up to the current day, I was always very passionate about body composition. The area I had the most interest in, it was always the area that I got the most interest as far as clients were concerned. And I think really, if I'm being honest, I was almost a jack of all trades for such a long period of time. It was quite a big step in the last year and a half to kind of step into, the only area I've not dived into or feel like I really achieved mastery in was body composition. And that's actually what kind of led me into, I suppose, chasing after that as right. Well, I'm not going to take on as many rehab clients. I'm not going to take on as many performance clients. I want to really go all in on one area that I feel really passionate about. And that's kind of what got me into doing that. Worked at a place called Body Fitness for about a year as the director of training there, and that kind of got me a bit more experience of handling a team of trainers. At one point, I think we were 11 of us at one stage. To put it in very PC terms, I just didn't quite see eye to eye with the vision of the owners of the business. Left on good terms, which is there. And then that's where Mal and I had a bit of conversation on a vacation to Vietnam, and we just kind of said, listen, we need to now back ourselves here. We've been doing this for long enough. We've had the collective experiences now to try and do something a bit different and try and almost push from the front type thing with regards to the industry and what's being done here with body composition. And that's where I guess the initial discussions for the Better Body Collective began. So we opened the Better Body Collective as an official business here in Dubai in May 2019, and we've been trying to just gather a bit of momentum since, really. So I think that pretty much brings us up to the current day.
Perfect. I was just going to touch on there, like what you were saying about, jack of all trades. And, I highlighted it at the start as well, where I knew you from and what you were doing before. But it's now that you've kind of dialed in what your niche is, it's such a positive thing that you're someone, who's been in the industry for such a long time. You've dipped in and out of different things. You've found what your passion is, but then you get to pull in all that experience from all those other areas. So, someone, I'm sure you get it all the time, someone who's massively into CrossFit, who can't lose any body fat, you can understand where they're currently at right now and what they need to manipulate and change. And that's, you can't buy that. You can't buy that experience.
Yeah, 100%. I think the way I always say is that it's not necessarily that it makes me better than other coaches who are delivering body composition, but I think what it does provide, like you said, is I have a very unique lens on which to view problems through. And, but with having that background and also I worked at a clinic for 6 months doing post-rehab and stuff like that as well. And so, like you say, when you do get people coming to you who maybe are just gym pop, want to transform their physique, it's so nice to be able to lean on these other areas or disciplines that maybe some other coaches may or may not have. So I agree. I don't regret one bit, because a lot of people would say, well, would you not prefer just to went back to the start and just been all in a body comp and you'd have this big laundry list of testimonials by now? I'm like, well, actually I quite enjoy now the challenge of, well, I almost feel like I've kind of became a bit reborn in the last year, and it's almost like I'm a rookie at this now, and I enjoy the challenge of becoming one of the best at it. That's kind of what keeps me motivated to keep going. So
that's cool. So just to go, like, I don't know exactly the type of person that's listening to this, but I have a good idea from kind of like my audience and what I do with Movement Wins as well. And, I'm not going to be getting people listening to this who are already at where they want to be in terms of body fat and that type of stuff. So I think you're very much talking to an audience here who are, perhaps fairly active in their training, but they're just trying to dial in and just find that next level of where they want to go to, which is where I want you to kind of start off from. I think most people now, for the last couple of years, it's been thrown at us through every personal trainer, every fitness professional, calories in, calories out. I think people understand the concept of that now. Whether they're practicing that and managing it themselves is a different question, but I think we understand that. So I actually want to start our conversation today on, leveling up your fat loss past that. We understand that we need to be burning more calories than we're consuming. What is kind of like the next step? What happens with your clients when they first come on board with something like the Better Body Collective?
Brilliant question. So yes, and maybe this is quite noticeable from anyone who does follow me on social media. I don't actually do nowadays a lot of nutrition, and I do plan to. But the reason is that I feel like the calories in, calories out rhetoric is, and granted, people do need to be often reminded, because people often want to forget it, or stuff like the insulin hypothesis and toxins and all that sort of stuff. But I think the problem is that people need to understand that calories in, calories out in premise is simple. Actually, in the reality and day-to-day application, it's actually quite. I always like to say that calorie or energy moving target, and it's a constantly moving target all the time for a multitude of different reasons. Coffee now, thank you. It's a moving target for a multitude of reasons, and there's a number of factors that contribute to energy balance, and a lot of people will often just think, well, that's how much exercise and what I eat, but the reality is there's a multitude of factors that play into people very downplay the importance of managing stress and the importance of a good sleep routine. Or if I were to get a bit more technical with it, they don't have a very understanding of what circadian architecture or hygiene. That maybe I'm not 100% sure what circadian architecture or hygiene just means that circadian refers to those what we know as our circadian rhythms in our body, and people think sleep, but actually the body has thousands of circadian rhythms for biological process in the body. And a lot of people often think as well that's purely based off of the sun going up and the sun going down. And it is one of the key drivers for that, but there's actually a lot of other, and almost think of it as like a clock. Your body has a ton of internal clock working and moving to keep your body still and doing the job. And the problem is that when you are sitting inside all day, you don't get a lot of sunlight, and you're burning the candles at both ends. And I'll just give an example of sleep question. I'm sure as well, Joff. Is it not just enough that I get my 7 hours of sleep and they're in bed at midnight, 1 in the morning, and having to take the time to explain to people, the circadian architecture, what you're giving out on if you're and getting up early. Try to get people to understand that there's all the different stages of your sleep cycle, like your deep and your REM sleep, and you can refer to sleep as non-REM if you want to, if it makes it easier. But you're going to bed late and getting up early, which most people we know do, and a lot of personal do also hustle, and then they're also training clients at it all the time. You burn the candle at both ends from deep sleep, which is half of the night, assuming that you get 0.2 a.m. in the morning. That's when the majority sleep is being gained. So imagine then if you're going to bed at midnight or o'clock, you're chopping down that window for deep sleep. And a lot of the regenerative processes that we need to go through if we're concerned about holding on to muscle or performing at our best, whether it be at work or in the gym or outside of it, you need that deep sleep for it. If you're maybe not getting enough sleep in the later part of the sleep cycle, which is from that 2, 3 a.m. all the way through maybe 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, you start robbing from a lot of, as I like to call it, the backup memory aspect of your sleep, which is this idea of your processing and dealing of information, and how you kind of and store that is done through that REM cycle. If you're someone who's maybe struggling to have focus, is struggling to hold and retain information, chances are you're probably someone who doesn't have a very good REM. And so trying to explain to clients that it's not about simply the amount. A way to do it, summarize what we're talking about. People often downplay, and we're actually the only organism on the planet that will purposefully forgo sleep to do more work, to do other things. No other organism on the planet will deliberately forgo sleep. And that's quite an interesting concept as humans, how we, despite it being so vital to performing and functioning as beings, we just seem to have a very good self-sabotage mechanism of just kind of, no, I'll stay up later, I'll do that more work, I'll watch another episode on Netflix. So yeah, to summarize, if you're not getting to bed, not only for the right amount of time, but you're not getting a very good sleep and wake cycle going, it can have huge implications for performance, health. And then if we were to get into the fat loss element of it, the reality, as we know, is that when you're very sleep deprived, your decision making becomes very heavily impaired, both on a psychological level, but also on a physiological level as well. So we know we have hunger and satiety hormones known as leptin and ghrelin. Those tend to both become dysregulated. So you get this kind of double-edged sword where you eat and you don't feel as satisfied, but you get hungrier sooner as well. And so that's, it's like kind of driving the car with the handbrake on. You're kind of, going, but you're not really getting anywhere much fast. And that's the way I always explain it to people, is why put yourself in a position where you're just making the work so much harder than it needs to be. And I kind of would say that stress management is sleep. If you just really become a selfish sleeper, meditation, whatever you want to call it, if you think meditation is woo, or however your brain tends to think about mindfulness or kind of practices that allow you to be a bit more in tune with yourself, whatever works for you. It might just be doing like a mobility WOD or whatever it is, like doing some stretching, mobility rolling for 20 minutes, whatever allows you to relax and calm down. Put a practice in place and really become super guarded and protected with your sleep and your stress strategies. So that'd be the first thing.
Sorry, have I got you back there? Sorry, froze my side
Yeah.
then. So what I was going to say was, that's what, and one of the reasons I wanted to get you on is because literally from that first part of the conversation, we're talking about fat loss, and lifestyle factors is such a big part of it. You said people are driving with the handbrake on, they're making poor decisions because of lack of sleep. Like that's where it starts from. And I guess from like a fitness professional level, and I definitely went through a stage of this and kind of in my earlier career as a personal trainer or as a health and fitness coach, where I would downplay sleep. I would, like, I'll admit that. And I guess that's kind of what it's got through to, who our potential clients are, our members now, that you're saying they're coming to you or coming to me or coming to someone else and saying, hey, I want to look better. I want to have a six pack. And we're going, hey, what you need to do first is sleep more. And it's for them being able to connect those dots together. I mean, you've done it perfectly then, but then it's just trying to get that throughout the industry, I guess, right?
100%, because people often say, oh, well, it's because my cortisol's through the roof, that's why I'm getting fat. And so I think as coaches, if we can become really good at taking what might seem quite abstract concepts and then kind of say, right, well, sleep's not directly making you gain fat, it's the indirect repercussions of you not getting enough sleep that are leading to you to over-consuming or essentially underutilizing activity like steps or exercise or whatever else. Like you skip the gym because you're knackered and that throws things out of whack, for example. So it's always very explainable, but I think it's just communicating it, kind of meeting them with where they are and communicating it on their level in terms they understand. I think that's the key thing.
Okay, cool. Let's turn it around slightly then. Obviously, that was the first point that you've gone down in terms of like sleep. What about either exercise or nutrition? Just how would you deal with your clients in that regard?
It's a great question. So I think it might be worth maybe even talking you through the kind of intake process at the Better Body Collective and maybe what we're kind of considering when we're maybe setting up someone's nutrition and designing a training protocol. So I guess always what we've got to do is we've got to look at, right, where's the client at currently? So we tend to send out an application form, and from that application form, we have a couple of well-worded questions in such a way that allow us to decide, right, is this client someone we actually want to entertain, bring into an initial consultation, whether that be over Zoom or whether it be in person. If we do decide that actually this person sounds like they're in the right place to do this, we then bring them to a meeting. When we sit down for that initial meeting, I think the first thing we actually do, and again, I'll get to the nutrition and the training stuff. The first thing we actually do is we manage expectations very, very, very clearly from the start. So we want to understand, right, what are their goals? What are their expectations that they've outlined to us before we've met? We will then often sit and say, right, well, based on what you're telling me you want to achieve, if it's only body composition focused, we usually like to try and tease out them, well, you might say, okay, on a superficial level, you want to achieve this, but why do you really want this? And until they can really tell us like a real meaningful, like it might be only, some people can only get like 2, 3, 4 layers deep. But there's a really cool concept known as seven layers deep, which is this idea of asking someone why they want to do something and trying to go 7 whys deep. And to be honest, the majority of people can't get to 7. You get to 4, and some people break down, start crying. Other people can. They don't have a clarity of vision of exactly what it is they want to do and why. And I think so that's where it starts. And I feel like if someone had to ask me what's the number one mistake that people make with their fat loss efforts, their performance efforts, or whatever goal they're trying to achieve, is that they just do not have a clear vision of what it is they're trying to do and have a real deep intrinsic reason as to why they want to get there. So I think that starts there. Once we've figured that out, it's then going to make it much, much easier. And ideally, we've built a bit of rapport by that point as well. It's going to be much, much easier to then allay any limiting beliefs they might have, maybe any misconceptions they might have. And I think that the conversation literally starts with all of that. Then once we've gathered all that, then it might be like, right, tell me how much you're training at the moment. Okay, how do you feel at the moment when you do that? What's your nutrition looking like? What's your lifestyle habits looking like? What's your sleep like? Once we have all that data together, I'm going to then take stock of all of that, and I can have a picture of what we call, it's a term we use is allostatic load. So the best way I can describe allostatic load is imagine total distress from the environment, from external factors, physiological factors, internal factors, and then think of eustress, which is the stress that you self-impose on yourself. And so we take those two kind of types of stress put together, and that's going to give us a total combination of the amount of stressors that are being placed on that person as an organism. If we know those things, that's going to very heavily dictate, right, what is your recoverability from, say, a training protocol? Are you someone who's physiologically or psychologically in a position right now to go through a fat loss phase? Even though that's your goal, it might be a lady comes to me and she's got, long-term or mid-term PCOS, and her BMR is just through the floor, and she's been chronically restricting energy intake for years and years and years and years and years. She might have hypothalamic amenorrhea, which just essentially means that they're just no longer bleeding, right? Or they're potentially the opposite end of the spectrum, where they just don't have a very good regulation of how they control their menstrual cycle. They maybe have a lot of different menstrual complaints or issues. That client comes to me versus Joff comes to me and says, yeah, I'm a pretty good neck, I'm a pretty healthy lad, I just want to take it to the next level. You just have to handle those clients in such a different way. So for her, she would start off in the better body method of what we call the prepare phase, which means we've got to take her through as long as it takes to build her calories back up, which is hard for people to get their head around sometimes, because she's like, well, I want to diet, I want to lose weight. It's like, but you're not ready to go there yet. You're not physiologically ready. You're not psychologically ready to go through the rigors and the stress that a fat loss phase, a kind of prolonged energy deficit is going to cause on your body. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to build you up first to at least an acceptable maintenance place, get you to a place where things are starting to work a little bit more effectively. And then when you're there, we're now at a point where we can maybe start taking you through the rigors of a fat loss phase. So we've got 5 phases that we tend to work people through. And this kind of relates to the whole idea of outlining the whole journey and not just the fat loss phase, because I'm sure you've had this as well, Joff. Like, most people come to us as coaches, and their perception of, okay, your value to me as a coach is I need you to get me from here to here, because their perception is that all of my happiness is going to come from getting to the end point. So we explain to clients that the end point's a checkpoint along the journey. It's one checkpoint, and actually it's a small part of the overall picture of the coaching journey. We need to get you prepared. We need to then take you to that end point or that checkpoint. Then we need to reverse diet you out of that checkpoint. And then we need to give you a maintenance strategy that actually works, so that you're not going to end up back where you started when you first came to me. And so we have a 5-step process we call that, which is prepare, which is the beginning part. And that could be anywhere from 2 weeks to, say, 3 months, 4 months, depending on the individual. Then there's transform. Transform can be split into what we call T1 and T2, as we term it. T1 is kind of that initial big push. That's kind of like the first 12 to 16 week big push, get the majority, 8 to 12% of their body weight off if that's what it takes. Give people a clue. A lot of people have a lot more body weight and body fat to lose than they think they do. And I think what we're finding more and more with our team of coaches, is a team of 7 of us now, that if someone came and said, and I asked them, like, how much do you think you need to lose to get the 6-pack you want? Oh, I'll just lose like 6, 7, 8 kilos. Usually you double it and add a little bit more, and that's actually where they need to get to. And that's mind-blowing for some people, because they're just like, what do you mean? I was like, well, and I showed them pictures. I was like, this guy hasn't done yet. He's lost 20 kilos. And like, what do you mean? It's like, because they don't really understand how it works, because their expectations have been so poorly managed by an industry that wants to push 8 to 12-week transformations to people.
Yeah.
And the reality is that for most people, it's going to be a 12-month transformation, realistically. And most of the clients, when we start with them, we explain to them, listen, this is at least a minimum of a 6 to 9 month commitment to get pretty close to where you're trying to get to. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people who can get great results in like a 12-week period. There are, but they're definitely the minority, not the majority.
Yeah, just on that one, yeah, because I've definitely been someone as well. And, the 12-week, 8-week, 4-week, whatever type of program it is, they're out there. And if you look at the main reason that they're out there, they're probably there to entice people in, to get people's kind of just taste buds going, oh, I can achieve that in 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, as opposed to what they can, actually hit in their goal in that time. And what I've found is, and this goes back into what you were saying about, it resonated with me so much when you were saying, a lady coming to you who's in a different position to someone like me. The amount of rapport and the fact that you have these hurdles that they need to jump over in order to get into your program is your program, right? You're not just taking on every Tom, Dick and Harry who just wakes up one morning and wants to lose body fat. And that's probably the reason that you get such great results. I mean, anybody who looks at your page, the Better Body Collective page, will see the great results you get, because you're already setting yourself up at an advantage because you've got the right people in. You're not giving the time of day to the people who you know aren't serious, which I guess from a business perspective carries its own problems. Obviously, you can't appeal to everybody, but it must be really, really kind of feel good, right? Knowing that you've got that person there at that level, they're going to do exactly what you say. Because I was going to tie this into adherence. You know, you've got people there that are going to really commit to the process. And that 12-week, like you've got it in those different terms. I did a 12-week program before the lifestyle reset. And that was never about getting someone from point A to where they want to be. It was always about, hey, I can give you a lot of knowledge in this 12 weeks to give you the habits that you can go and potentially sustain for the rest of your life. If you get to the end of those 12 weeks, hey, let's look at some other options. Maybe you don't need all of that information from me anymore. Maybe you just need someone to check in with once a week, or, you know, ask some questions to, or that support around it. But I think the way that you've structured it in terms of no time frame is, it just goes to show that the end user is really what's in your mind, right?
Yeah, because I think we when we kind of structured it out and had those 5 phases, I'd been at a place, a facility where I was working, where the time frame was very strictly, like, you need to get this in this time. And, you know, as I started observing so many numbers going through the program, it was almost like you had your own kind of in-house experiment of, let's see how many people successfully actually manage this. And it was such a low success rate. And that just kind of made me look at, well, this just isn't, something has to change. So we kind of set out for, right, well, let's really make sure that and we do this with all clients we work with, we send them essentially like what we call our Better Body Roadmap, which is to them and their individual goals and where they're at. We give them essentially like a breakdown of the timeline for each phase. So say it's like, right, for prepare 2 weeks, for transform phase, it's going to take one T1 of 16 weeks, a 2-week diet break, and then a T2 of 8 weeks to kind of roughly get to where your goal is. Then we're going to, give you maintenance again. Then we're going to reverse diet you back up. And that's going to take 8 to 10 weeks. Then we're going to do a maintenance phase. And then they might get to a point where they say, right, I want to build more muscle now, because maybe they lost all the body fat. And this is quite interesting for a lot of guys. They often get really lean and like, oh man, I'm not as big as I thought I was. I've not got as much muscle as I thought I had, because you strip all the fat off and you realize they're actually carrying a lot of fat and a lot of water weight. And so then they might say, right, well, listen, you're in a great position now. You've dropped all that unwanted fat. You've reverse dieted and got to a point you've maintained for, say, 4 to 8 weeks now. Your body is absolutely loving you because you've put it in a prime place to really not only produce energy really effectively, but also to utilize different energy substrates really well. So what do you want to do now? And you're like, yeah, I want to get stronger. I want to go and do a Spartan race. I want to go in. And for me, that's the end game. Because when you get to a point where in an industry where they teach you to try and make clients as dependent on you as possible, for us, the end game is to create as much independence as possible so that we can taper down the amount of hands-on coaching we do, and they can start to take more ownership and independence of their own journey. And that for us is the ultimate end game in the end.
Yeah, and it's just so refreshing to hear it again. Like, this is, one of the reasons I got you on as well, because you, like I said, you're looking at it from the end user's point of view. You're trying to give them the best service to improve their life. You're not just going for that snapshot of, hey, here's what was achieved in 4 weeks or 8 weeks, because there's plenty of that going on. That's the majority of the fitness industry. People trying to make a quick quid from posting before and afters. So like I said, it's refreshing to hear. What other things do people need to consider if they're at, like I said, my kind of typical audience, someone who is relatively active now, they've been training for a little while, they're doing some strength training, some cardiovascular training, they're looking at maybe, improving their sleep, lowering calories, that type of stuff. What other things is there to consider, like social life, relationships, mental health? Is there anything that you talk about there?
I just realized as well, Josh, when we finished there, that I'd never actually really got into much of the nutrition stuff or the training stuff. So
that's all right.
It might be there and then build out. I think if I were to look at some nutrition elements that maybe people don't put enough weight into outside of calories, I would say the first thing is going to be people are very, very stingy with their vegetable intake or the micronutrient intake in general. It's a huge gap in the majority of people's diets. And what they don't understand is, gut health has obviously had a lot of popularity over the last 5-10 years in the industry, but the reality is as far as personal trainers and nutritionists are concerned, they're well outside the scope of practice to dive into the minutiae of gut health. However, what can we do to support someone's digestion? I think getting to a point where they're able to, one, digest food well. So what are their current digestive practices? If you had to ask most clients, listen, how do you currently eat? And like, what do you mean? It's like, well, when you take a bite of food, how many times do you chew the food before you swallow it? And they're like, oh, just like 3 and I'm done. And the reality is, what people don't realize is that your food should be like a paste-like consistency before you swallow it. But most people just are so stressed out, and they're entering into eating, which is meant to be a very parasympathetic process. So for those that don't know what I mean by that, you've got what's called the autonomic nervous system, which essentially regulates between different processes of fight, flight, response, like really high energy, high performance, and then parasympathetic, which is this kind of rest, digest, kind of down regulation of certain high energy activities. And so when it comes to digestion, that's a parasympathetic process. But you imagine a lot of people go for the lunch breaks at work, or they're just grabbing something last minute. Most people are walking around so sympathetically dominant all the time that when they eat the food they do eat, first of all, they don't chew and masticate it. So they don't do the 20 to 25 chews per bite that they take. So not only is the food entering into the digestive tract almost pretty much still whole food to a degree, they're also in a place where the digestive system is not in an optimal state to actually assimilate and break down those nutrients to produce hydrochloric stomach acid, to then produce sufficient amounts of bile to break down and emulsify foods. And so you get to a point where people are just literally putting themselves in such a poor position to not only utilize energy, but then what it means is that, okay, well, why am I getting so gassy? Why am I getting all these stomach cramps? Why am I getting so many complaints or issues when I go to train, for example? And a lot of it will start with just basic digestive habits. And the reason why often people as well, one of the questions I often get asked is like, what's one of the best things I can do to manage cravings? If you're just wolfing down your food and you're not taking the time to chew, there's a lot of different signaling processes that happen when you chew, when you smell your food, and when you're present with the food and you take your time. The digestive process starts on when you sit down and you smell your food. And all the kind of rituals that go into, like when you sit down, making sure you're not on your phone, on a screen, making sure that you're in an environment that feels safe and comfortable, making sure that you're really, really like, okay, I'm looking at the food I'm about to eat and I'm very grateful to eat this food. And then taking the time to chew it and really savor and understand the textures, the flavors, and everything else. That's all part of the digestive process, but people are so kind of mindless when they eat that it's just like, well, I have to eat, because if I don't, then I'm going to feel even more crap than I already do at the moment. So I think that's one thing the nutrition is, one, the digestion, but two, actually supporting the digestion when you do start chewing the food properly with sufficient fiber intake. And you're only really going to get that by eating, good quality fruits and vegetables, whole grains to an extent as well. And then I think outside of that is for a lot of people's a misunderstanding around protein and protein intake. Often in the industry, we all know the importance of calories and protein. It's the two things that tend to get talked about the most, but I think for the general pop, they still don't fully necessarily understand just how vital protein is, not only from a health point of view, but from a body composition point of view. It's so key to really nail your protein intake for a number of reasons, not just the nitrogen balance and having sufficient amino acids around to hold on to and build muscle, but from a satiety point of view and getting all the broad spectrum amino acids and everything else. So those would be the two main things with nutrition. I think then the third and last nutritional point would be having a bit of a better understanding of the body's energy systems and how that relates to food intake. So the way I explain it to my clients is, imagine you've got days where you're training really intensely, and then you've got days where you're doing very little, or you're doing very low steady state cardio or something like that. The energy demands of both of those days are very, very different. And so this is just a personal preference more than anything else. It doesn't mean that other people's strategies are necessarily right or wrong, but if we look at basic biochemistry and we understand that you've got your kind of anaerobic, very glycolytically demanding activities, such as high intensity exercise, lifting weights, versus things that are very what we call fat oxidative in nature, which you've got two different pathways, your anaerobic and your fat oxidative pathway, or glycolytic pathway, sorry. So you've got low and steady state cardio sessions. Ideally, if you're not utilizing a lot of glucose for energy, then on days where your activity is extremely low or not very intense, it doesn't then make that much sense to provide tons of additional or more glucose than we actually need. So one of our biases for programming nutrition with clients is to kind of match the energy demands of the energy system to the nutrition intake. And I think if you're trying to kind of level up body composition, having that kind of to and fro between, right, today is a very glycolytic day, I'm doing leg day today, I'm going to be absolutely dying, so I need to have a sufficient amount of energy availability from glucose and carbohydrates there to be able to get the most out of not only my performance during the session but also the recovery as well. But then if I'm just going to be going on the Stairmaster and just like, you know, keeping my heart rate in that fat oxidative zone, kind of 120 to 150 for like half an hour to an hour, chances are I probably don't need a 400 gram carb intake that day. So I'm going to pull that down. And so by playing around with understanding, okay, what is the energy demands of this activity at this point in time, you can start to match nutrition that way. And it's a very effective way of controlling energy intake as well.
Mate, just listening to you talk there and some of the points that you've made, it just goes to show that in terms of, yeah, the fitness industry is massive, but on the grand scheme of things, trainers and people in the industry aren't too far off. They're giving the right messages, but they're probably just not going that extra level like you go into. And just to give you an example, like your first 2 points, eating more veg, eating more protein, you know, on the opening side of that, you go, well, yeah, that's obvious. But then the points that you laid after that, in terms of even going into like gut health, I remember you being into your like gut health a few years ago, actually, and some of the stuff that you were doing. But the level of detail that you're able to go into gives people it's one of them. I can say eat more veg and someone just goes yes, but if they don't understand why they need to eat more veg, then eventually they're going to stop not eating as much veg, or they don't understand the importance of eating more protein, then they'll stop doing that. So I think from your point of view, where the depths that you're willing to go is kind of, listen, I'm doing this podcast now to put out to my listeners, but I'm using this as my own education system as well. So I think it's an awesome job what you're doing. And I think it's just testament to where you're at the moment in terms of the message you're trying to spread across the industry. I very much see you actually see you as someone who's talking more to maybe other fitness professionals who listen to this podcast as opposed to just the end user. But at the same time, if the end user has enough interest in it, they're going to take this on board as well.
I appreciate that. The reason why is that I guess, so I've actually got 3 coaches that I coach at the moment, and definitely the plan for me, at least in this year, is so we recently joined forces with a couple of guys who are also really well known here. You know Mark Doherty?
Yeah.
Probably you've crossed Mark's obviously a very intelligent guy. He's probably known a bit more for his nutrition because that's what he talks a lot more about. He's been 27 years in the industry, and so we recently kind of combined with Mark, and so that's why we're now a team of 7 as opposed to just a team of 3 or 4 of us. And it's funny, we're actually going to be releasing a lot of education in the second half of this year to coaches. Of course, this whole COVID thing is kind of put a pause to probably as and when coaches will be able to potentially even afford to do something like that. But we're actually talking about potentially running the first workshop for free. Cause just as something to give back a little bit. But yeah, you'd be right. I am at a point now, I've almost been doing this 10 years. I am at a stage where I'm very interested in the coach and working with coaches, and whether that be mentoring or coaching them, but also I would say like the general population who have maybe, like you said, they've kind of done the baseline stuff, they've kind of got pretty decent habits in place already. But I think the term you made at the beginning was exactly it. My part that I enjoy the most with people is the leveling up part. It's the right, you've done a lot of the good work and a lot of the hard work, how can we just help you to tweak and optimize things? And that's not to say that the work that people are doing to get the general population to that level is bad. I mean, I still enjoy that, which is why I still have some of those clients. But I think, yeah, definitely, I like that it's coming across that way, because that's
100%. Yeah. And I think it's a good path for you to go, and I'm excited for it. Like excited for you, sorry, in terms of, I guess, from your own personal point of view as well. You know, we're all in this game for the same reason. We want to help as many people as we can. We'd be lying if we said otherwise. We're always trying to help as many people as we can, and people do that in different directions. They go online, they open up bigger facilities, they own their own gym. But I guess for you, if you can have a team of coaches that you're mentoring or passing your knowledge onto, who are going to go and pass it on to 10 of their clients, your overview of how many people you're helping is leveled up then. And I know you're going to be having a podcast soon as well.
Yeah, it's in the next couple of weeks, it'll be I'm not going to launch it within 2 weeks, but I'm just going to start the interviews. And I'm sure you'd had the same thing in the beginning, like you just try to get enough skin in the game, get enough content in the back burner, so that when you do start all the production and everything else, you've got enough content to keep you going if you, for whatever reason, couldn't do like a podcast, say, for 2 weeks or whatever else. Yeah. But I think, like you said as well, with reaching more people, I would say, unfortunately, not all trainers that enter the industry are in it for that reason. And I think that's a shame. There's a lot of coaches, I'll not say coaches, a lot of people who come into the industry that they are literally doing it for themselves. They see it as a quick buck, an easy buck. And I think, I'll just be really blunt, I think there's a lot of that in Dubai. There's a lot of people who see this as a bit of a long-term holiday. And I think, unfortunately, there's a big lack of professionalism in the industry as far as seeing it that way. Like for me, like I could just be, you know what, I'm just going to stick to being myself, or Gilmour, or Matt and I have talked to this a number of times. We could just keep being us two and just cracking on and not taking on the extra stress and the extra responsibility that comes with having a team and doing other things. But you know what, like I think if you've got a certain ability or a certain knowledge or skill set, you're doing not only yourself, but you're doing everyone else who potentially could benefit from that a huge disservice if you don't then go on to share that. And so I think it's not something I take lightly. And I always say to people, anyone who comes to me for coaching, whether a trainer or Gen Pop, I do not take their investment of time, effort, and energy lightly. Because if they're going to make a huge investment in me, then they best be knowing that I'm going to bend over backwards to make sure they get from it what they're ready to get from it. So I just thought I would just add that in there. For those trainers who have got a genuine heart, then anything we can all do as a collective, as an industry, to help each other, we should do that.
Yeah. And just given the circumstances at this time, I think people are starting to pull together a little bit more. And I guess it's another podcast that we could do. We don't want to batter the fitness industry too much, but I'm sure there's some other questions that can be asked around that. Ross, I don't want to take any more of your time, mate. Do you want to just let everybody know where they can find you, find your business as well?
Yeah, so best place to get it is on Instagram at Better Body Collective. For myself, I'm on at Coach Ross Gilmour, and Better Body Collective on Facebook as well. And there's not really much. I mean, yes, we have a website, but things are very much going through construction at the moment. So I'll probably just leave it at that for the moment.
Yeah, cool. All right, Ross, thank you very much for coming on today. That was very, very eye-opening for myself, and I'm sure the listeners really enjoyed that one as well. I'm going to definitely get you back on the show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that.
Cheers, mate.